Welcome to Data Skeptic. Our mini episodes are gentle introductions to concepts related to artificial intelligence. These short discussions are meant to serve as a primer for the topic. Learn more by reading our show notes at dataskeptic.com.
Well, Linda, thanks again for coming today to the special lunch that I told you we were going to have. A little bit of a surprise for you, right?
So where are we?
We're in beautiful downtown Leimert Park in Los Angeles at one of the local cafes. They invited us in. They're giving us a free lunch today.
We're not. We're at home in our normal...
Just play along. There's going to be a sound effect in the background. Act like it's a thing.
Oh, okay. So I'm going to play along. Oh,
it's a
we're in this
sponsorship,
lovely cafe. Okay, so what's going on? What am I going to order?
Do you think there's such a thing as a free lunch?
Well, I actually think this name sounds political to me nowadays. When I was younger, free lunch was a government-sponsored thing where if you didn't make enough money, you get it's not a free lunch. You would get sponsored lunch. But they called it free lunch. And now I wonder, that's probably not a good name because it's not free.
Oh, you're taking it there. Yeah, I don't think it's at all political in its origin. And it just
sounds political.
No. The basic idea is that
political.
You know, kind of like all the restaurants, they can have the same menu and different prices. And if you shop around, maybe if you like soup, certain places have cheaper soup here or there. But overall, you know, like you just kind of average out at the restaurants. There's no place.
Where's the free lunch?
Well, that's what you're saying. There's no way to optimize the problem all right, let's start from the basics. All right, let's get into more machine learning stuff, and then I'll explain it as we go. It's a little bit complicated, but we'll get there. Can you, to begin with, just name some food items?
Spinach, ricotta, tuna, cookies, apples, tofu, cottage cheese, assortment of seasonal but cheap fruit like oranges, cheese. I love cheese. And then some kind of sweet like chocolate, dates, cookies.
I gotcha. All right, that's a good list. We could go on and on, but I think that people get the idea. Now, tell me some of the properties of those foods.
Well, the first section I named has protein. So I've been trying to eat my daily dose of protein. Measured
in grams, I presume?
Yes. So I'm supposed to have 60 grams of protein a day. So that means I'm supposed to have 20 grams at every meal, which that's a lot.
Yep. What other properties?
And then, I forgot to name, I eat some kind of green, like spinach. So sometimes, I just don't have time to make it taste good, but I make it taste acceptable. So I just kind of saute it and I throw some seasoning on and eat it with something flavorful. So it's kind of like bland like my rice. So I put it next to
Interesting. This is not where I wanted to go. What I was looking for is the properties. Like it has calories. You got protein. You got that one. It has saturated fats. Just a quick list. What are the properties of your things?
Yes, well, if you actually want to talk about nutrition, there's things called macros. I didn't know they were called macros.
Well, tell me more about this.
Macronutrients, I guess is what they're called. I didn't know they were called macros until I had dinner with my friend Amy. And she was like, I need to get my macros. And I was like, what are macros? And she's like, protein, fat, and carbs. So those are your 3 nutrients that you definitely need throughout the day. And it's supposed to be a third. Typical.
Oh, really?
A typical person, a third should be protein, a third should be fat, and a third should be carbs.
Oh, great. Well, we're getting a health lesson today. I didn't expect. This is excellent.
But I feel like a third fat is a bit too high, and I tend to have high cholesterol in my family, and we don't process fat, so I actually aim for less fat.
Yes, you fine-tune it a little differently.
And I try to go for more protein and carbs to replace the fat.
So those are excellent properties you could measure in each of the foods you eat. I'll throw out a couple other random ones, like you could track its country of origin. Maybe that's an important factor. You could track whether something has a seed or not, whether it's meat or not. We could go on and on with different properties that all these foods have, right?
Well, those are random foods. I don't track where my food comes from.
So from a machine learning perspective, what I might want to do is take all those features in and make some prediction about the foods, like learn a different function over the data. So, for example, if I listed a food to you, could you tell me if it was a fruit, a vegetable, or other?
Likely.
What about a radish?
That's a vegetable.
All right, what about a squash?
I mean, the scientific definition of a fruit is if it has seeds. So squash has seeds. You should probably go with that.
Yeah, that's a confusing edge case. That's why I picked it, because it doesn't seem like a fruit, but I think you're right. The key is the seeds. So now, interestingly enough, you picked up this taxonomical feature. And if we ran machine learning on the same problem, it would likely learn the same thing. That if you asked the machine to learn to classify foods into these groupings, that it would first check the column that says if it has seeds, yes or no, and that would be very informative in how it makes its prediction.
Yeah, sure.
What if you wanted to predict things that our parrot Yoshi will eat?
Well, she likes things with various textures.
So maybe you could learn from the textures of the foods. What if we brought home a new food that Yoshi'd never had, and we offer it to her? Do you think you'd have some accuracy in predicting whether she liked it or not?
Yeah, I mean, we both theorize on this. We go, what would Yoshi do?
What about cactus? Do you think she'd eat cactus?
Probably, as long as there weren't any thorns on it.
Yeah, I'm leaning towards yes. I feel like she would really enjoy a good cactus.
Yeah, she would.
So how do we know that? What information have we learned from that allow us to make a prediction like that?
Well, she seems to like plants, and she seems to like gnawing on things, and cactuses have a tough outer skin, and yet might have liquids in them, so I think she might like it.
So we can take all these features we know about foods, whether it has seeds, whether it has a skin, all this kind of stuff, and we can come up with different objective functions. Those are the things we like to predict. We can predict, is it a fruit? We can predict, would Yoshi like this or not, right? There's a lot of different classifications we could have. So this is, in essence, the process of machine learning. How many different things do you think we might be able to predict with those functions? Like how many useful labels? Like is it a fruit? Is it high in fiber? Of all these different ways we could label the data, do you have any guess as to how many types of labelings there are?
So I don't understand. Are we talking about Yoshi eating food, or what are we talking about here? What kind of data are you labeling? Where is this data from?
The data set then is all of its rows, if we think of it as a spreadsheet. The rows are the different food groups or the food types, all these things we named. And the columns are various properties we know about it, like how much protein it has, how much fiber it has. Is it, all the different qualities
like an apple.
Measure. Yeah. So an apple would be described by maybe 100 variables that say things about it, like its sugar content and all that.
Then what was your question now?
All those things are useful in making predictions. We would maybe come up with one predictor that could say, do I think this food is a fruit? And another predictor that could estimate whether or not our parrot will like the food. And the process of machine learning is finding the right way to map all of that input data to the function we're seeking.
I don't know what the function is that we're seeking.
So functions are like the ground truth. So there is, for every food, it's definitely true or false that it's a fruit, right? There's no half fruits in the world.
I don't know.
Right?
They do hybrid, genetic modified foods.
I don't think that makes it a half a fruit. But interesting, no, I don't think so. I think it's still just a fruit.
How can we define fruit when they, for example, watermelons, they took out the seeds? It's still a fruit, but it doesn't have seeds.
But it has the other properties, like it grew on the tree and stuff like, or on a vine or something like that. I'm not a biologist, sorry.
Neither am I.
But all I'm saying is there are other things that make it definitively a fruit, despite not having seeds anymore, right?
I assume they're scientists, so it's their job to make it up, yes.
They can find like the ground truth. They can definitively say, is something a fruit or not? Similarly, if we really want to know if Yoshi would like something, we could try and feed it to her, and then we would know the answer. There is an unknown truth about the world, right? We don't know all the values, but the values have an answer. And if we want to predict that, then we'd like to come up with a hypothesis that's as close to the truth as possible, right? That we get the most number of cases correct. So let me phrase it to you this way.
Like guesses?
Not so much guesses, but I'm trying to define, let's maybe just define a hypothesis in a very mathematical way. So you have all this input data, right? Different features you know about the foods. Those can map to some true or false column, right? Each one can be yes or no, it's a fruit. Yes or no, it's a vegetable, that kind of stuff. Whatever that objective is, that unknown thing we'd like to predict, a hypothesis is just a way of saying, here's how I think you take in the input data and figure out what the output is.
What's an example?
Let's say my test for is something a fruit is I check, does it have seeds? If it has seeds, then I will declare it's a fruit. If it has no seeds, I will declare it's not a fruit. Right? That's a hypothesis. I'm hypothesizing how you predict something's a fruit or not. But
so you made up a rule.
Yeah.
Based on characteristics.
Yep.
Present or not.
That rule is my hypothesis.
Okay.
And it only depends on seeds. It doesn't depend on the color or anything, or the salinity or anything like that. It's going to work pretty good, right? A lot of the time that is a good rule. But then there's like sunflower seeds.
They're seeds.
Yeah, well, they're not a fruit though. But I would be like, oh, a sunflower is a fruit. And I would get that one wrong.
Yep, grains or seeds.
Yeah, so I would get that wrong too. So my hypothesis is flawed, right? There should be another hypothesis that's a little bit more complicated that says, okay, well, if it's a seed, then I don't immediately declare it a fruit. I have to do some other things like check, does it grow from a tree or
Is it
whatever.
a nut?
Yeah, is it a nut? And if
But
it is...
sunflower is not a nut. It's still a seed. But we eat the seed. See, the fruit, I guess the definition should be if it's a seed.
Oh, yeah, that's an important property.
That's the core thing you eat.
Yeah.
For fruit, you usually don't want the nut or the seed.
Yeah.
So that could be one difference.
Yep. Do you
I'm just
eat the seed?
I'm making this up as I go, Biologists
No, that's
chime
a really
in.
good one, yeah.
Biologists, speak up.
I'm sure we're going to
Rise
get a lot
up
of letters.
and
yeah.
correct us.
A hypothesis, then, is any method of mapping from the features you know to the outcome you're interested in. Would you guess for any given problem how many hypotheses there are?
Well, it depends how many attributes there are.
That's true, yeah.
And how many entries there are.
Let's just say you're hitting all the right points, and it's a lot of hypotheses in general. In fact,
Who's making up these hypotheses? You haven't actually said who is making them up.
okay, good point. All I really want to establish is that there's a space of all possible hypotheses, right? Like you could write them all down and put them in a bag. Maybe it'd be a big bag because it's a lot of hypotheses, but they could be enumerated. Does that make sense?
What does it mean, enumerated? Numbered?
Yeah, number, because there's a finite number
You
of them.
could count them?
Yeah, you could count them.
So you could count them.
It might be a humongous number, but you could count them.
So I don't understand. So where are these hypotheses coming from?
Well, I haven't told you yet. I'm just saying that there's a finite number of them. You can count them.
Okay, so I
good
asked
with
a
that?
question and you haven't
All right,
answered
well,
it.
let's get into it.
So what's
I
going
didn't know if
on?
you'd be stuck on the other point. So who finds them? Well, in machine learning, we'd like an algorithm to find them. So the algorithm starts out with no information, and it looks at the data, and it says, based on this data, which hypothesis do I think is the correct one?
Based on the data, which hypothesis is the correct one? So the machine is doing it.
Correct.
Based on this data, what hypothesis? So they don't make up hypothesis first.
So they don't make it up in advance necessarily. They know all of the possible hypotheses in the world, right? Because they're countable. And then they look at the data and they say, which of these ones seem like they're good given what I've learned? So if there's a hypothesis, for example, that says red things are fruit and non-red things are not fruit, after observing just a little bit of data, it would be like, hey, this red hypothesis is not correct, right? It's obviously wrong.
Okay, so you're saying this machine algorithm thing wants to look at the data and then come up with hypotheses from the data.
Wants to find the most likely hypotheses, correct?
Wants to define the most likely hypotheses.
A general way we could describe it is to say that most algorithms try and consider every possible hypothesis, but only really consider the most likely ones.
So does it spit out 3 hypotheses and says the percentage of confidence?
That is how one algorithm could work. Sure, it might spit out 3 and say, these are my 3 best ones, weigh them each evenly and take the average.
Cool. So this assumes you have data.
Right, yeah, all machine learning really requires data pretty much. Now, certain algorithms are going to be better or worse at studying certain types of data. Does that surprise you?
What algorithms, for example, are you talking about?
Well, so take an algorithm like logistic regression, which uses linear regression kind of under the hood. That algorithm is really good when your data is linear. It's not so good if your data is like, it has some nonlinear features.
Okay.
But there are other types of algorithms like tree-based methods that are pretty robust to nonlinear data because they can find the different sort of elbows in the data. So there are this is why we have lots of different kinds of algorithms. Each try and take an interesting approach, and they work really well for certain problems and maybe not as well for others.
So you as a data scientist, are you going to pick the algorithms?
Yeah, that is one of the main things a machine learning engineer or data scientist has to do. They have to decide which algorithm do I think is appropriate for my problem.
Okay.
Although in general, really, you just kind of try them all and you see which one works the best because they're not
You try
hard
them
to
all.
run.
How many are there?
I mean, you try the main 5 or 6, logistic regression.
And you just look at the results?
Yeah, you inspect them, you look at the diagnostics.
And then what?
You check if they overfit or not, that kind of stuff. You just do model evaluation, and then you decide which one you think you want to use.
Okay.
Now, I just told you I try them all, right? And it's because they're easy. But do you think that eventually somebody will just figure out a way to make the one true best algorithm?
No.
Oh, why do you say that?
It's not one size fits all. The world doesn't work that way.
How do you know?
Well, the one algorithm would just be one that runs all 6.
Oh, yeah, there's more than 6, but I was saying 6. Yeah.
Okay, well, then one that runs all X amount of algorithms, that's the one algorithm. And then it picks it.
Yeah, well, so then it has to have a picking strategy, right? Why can't we just have one that has the best picking strategy?
Well, that doesn't mean it ran one algorithm, though. You said one algorithm. This one ran them all.
Well, so technically that algorithm would be uncomputable because it can't run them all in a finite amount of time.
Why? You do.
There's too many. No, I run a couple of them.
Okay, well then have your algorithm run a couple.
But what if there's like an algorithm I don't know how to use or something like that, or one that hasn't been invented yet?
Well, clearly you can't run it. You only run the ones you want. No, duh. This is not some time warp movie. I'll run something that hasn't been invented yet.
Well, no, I'm just talking about like why don't we have the one true best algorithm?
I mean, there's not one size fits all. Life doesn't work that way.
Huh. Well, you're right. You're actually 100% correct.
Clearly, I'm in project management. It's life.
Well, I don't know if you have the rigor of the formal proof, which I'm not going to share here, but
I don't need proof. I live my life. I'm a liver. I'm a lifer.
This is a topic called the no free lunch theorem. Actually, I should say the no free lunch theorems. Basically, they're the idea that in a problem like machine learning, also happens in optimization, if there's one algorithm has some advantage, like, oh, it's really good at solving a certain type of problem, it gets that way by like having a failure in some other area.
Yeah, I mean, that's the whole point. There's no one size fits all.
Right.
You can only be good at one area or bad in certain areas, but you can't be good all around.
Yeah, so if we were going to have a competition of algorithms and we just drew random problems out of a hat, then the outcome would be different every time. There's no one best algorithm. There's always some obscure algorithm that's going to work really, really good in certain situations, and once in a while you'll come across one of those problems. So there's no one best algorithm is the bottom line of the no free lunch theorem.
Great.
And some people, data scientist types will use this as a justification for why they think they'll always have a job and not be automated away, because if there's no one best one, maybe you need someone trying to find the closest you can get to it or something like that.
But I don't know. Yeah,
I actually find that quite specious myself. I don't think the no free lunch theorem is why data scientists will remain employed, because essentially there's a little bit of not a flaw, but a weird thing about the no free lunch theorem is it assumes a uniform distribution over the hypothesis space. I bet that sounds a little confusing, right?
What does that mean?
So let's break it down. So remember we were talking about that I said there are these hypotheses and you could write them all down. There's a lot of them and it's every possible mapping from data to output. Mm-hmm. So that includes like every possible mapping from the data to the output. So if we go back to the functions we were describing earlier, like where we have all this data about foods, and one function would be like, is it a fruit? Another function would be, does it have a lot of protein? And all those. We talked about all of these functions that are kind of intuitive, right? You would like to know how much iron is in your food. You probably don't care whether it has an even or an odd number of molecules in it, right? This is like an irrelevant thing to you.
It's so hard to track nutrition. I just can't look any further.
Yeah, that too, I guess. But even though you're not interested in something like that, or like even more ridiculous things, for example, when that fruit is produced or when a food item is, put into the store, you can assign it like a random stock ID of the store, right? And there's a mapping from the item to its stock number. But it's kind of like probably a random system, or it could be, if they assign random numbers to it. And you'll never be able to learn that. The most efficient way of describing it is just to list the mapping, right? Say this one maps to that one. You can't compress that data in any way. Whereas like determining if something's a fruit, you can kind of compress your knowledge of the data because you just have to look at 3 or 4 traits and then you can know for sure.
What do you mean by compress the data?
There are maybe 10,000 food items that we'd like to know if they're a fruit or not. One way to answer the question is to memorize all the data, right? So that you just know, regardless of why and how something's a fruit, memorize that bananas are fruit and that chairs are not fruit.
Well, that's easy. A chair you don't need.
Well, no, see, that's what I'm calling like a compressing the data. Because now you're saying the property is, do I eat this? And things that I don't eat can't be fruits.
For sure.
Yeah, you've compressed your knowledge then. You've represented your hypothesis more efficiently because now you can rule out all non-food items immediately. You don't have to remember specifically.
So what does it mean to compress knowledge? I'm still confused.
It's that you can learn the label of something by looking at just a few of its traits.
And that's called compressing your knowledge?
I'm calling it that today because then I can give you any new items, and you can, even if you've never seen them before, you can right away tell me the outcome.
That just sounds like learning.
Yeah, that is learning, exactly.
I don't think that's compressing my knowledge. That's just learning.
Well, another way you can learn is to memorize, right? Where you have to.
That is learning.
Well, no, memorization in this context, I'm saying is rather than understanding, you just commit to memory what's what. So if I show you a banana, you can say, yes, that's a fruit. And if I say why, you're like, I have no idea. I just didn't know that banana equals fruit.
Some disciplines are taught that way.
Yeah, some things are actually for good reason if there's no underlying pattern.
Well, it's not that there is no pattern. It's that the pattern is hard to explain unless you know the basics.
Oh, you just hit on a key point. Yeah.
So it's a cyclic thing. So they just make you memorize. Like one example is chemistry. They just make you memorize a periodic table.
As Linda was mentioning, you can learn by rote memorization, or you can learn by developing your intuition. Or maybe we should call it wisdom or true knowledge. I want to thank our sponsor, Brilliant.org, and tell you about their site. It's a great place to go if you want a learning experience focused on doing and understanding, on practice and instruction over rote memorization. In this mini episode, I'm not going to give you the formal proof of the no free lunch theorem. I guess I could, but it wouldn't make for a great podcast. If you want the formal mathematical proof, go to Wikipedia. This episode is here to help you get the intuitive idea of the concept and learn how and when it applies. If you like that style of learning, you owe it to yourself to at least go check out Brilliant.org. There's tons of free stuff available for you to check out before committing. Do that by heading to Brilliant.org/dataskeptic.
So they just make you memorize. Like one example is chemistry. They just make you memorize a periodic table.
Yeah, exactly.
And then they start teaching you things about how they connect. And then you're like, And then you start thinking back to the periodic table and you're like, oh, okay, maybe that was important. And they could have explained it better, but they didn't. They just made you memorize it.
Yeah, I guess you could derive all of those things from fundamental physics, or you can just memorize the values on the table. That memorization, that's a good example. That then is the shortest description of the periodic table, as far as you know at that point, is just to memorize the table. There's no smaller way to remember it.
What's smaller? What's defined as smaller? Simple? Easier?
Like, let's say for the quiz, I asked you to sit down and redraw the periodic table. You would have to kind of have an exact memory of the periodic table. Whereas if I said, Linda, sit down and write out the numbers 1 to 100, you don't have to memorize the numbers. You just start at 1 and then you know how to add to it, right?
Well, you memorize the system.
Exactly. If you can learn a system, then that's like you've found a lower rank representation. That's your hypothesis. But if you can't, if you like the periodic table, have to just remember every little detail to get it all reproduced later, that is like an uncompressed hypothesis. That's where its complexity is high enough that you just have to memorize it.
So what in that context does uncompressed mean?
It means that the shortest way to describe it is just to state the whole mapping. No shortcuts. Of all the possible functions in the whole universe, most of them are uncompressible in this way, which means most of them are just like random labels. The functions we think about, the stuff we'd like to learn, like is it poisonous, is it nutritious, all that kind of stuff, those are a small subset of the possible functions over data. The no free lunch theorem applies to if we assume a uniform distribution over all the problems one might want to solve. And under that circumstance, there's no one best algorithm.
So what does uniform mean again?
It means equally likely.
Oh, okay.
But the reality is, if I wanted to hire someone to do machine learning for me, I'm not hiring them to solve a random problem. I have a very specific problem that exists in the real world that I want to solve. It always has some lower order to it, it seems, for whatever reason. The problems, at least the human beings are able to find interesting. That's why, even though the no free lunch theorem is true, there are some algorithms that are simply better than others or more useful than others in practice. Or that's one of the reasons.
Yeah. Life is like that, huh?
I guess so.
In theory, sounds good, but in practice, no. And it doesn't take being a data scientist to know that.
All right. Well, so you brought some wisdom to the table on this episode.
Yeah. Just don't have to know. I think you were surprised that I got it right. I think listeners, you could hear the surprise in his voice.
No, I'm just surprised because I arrived at it from a very, computer sciencey path, and you just kind of arrived at it from, in a Hallmark sort of way, I think.
Hallmark? Yeah. I'm sorry. That's a cheesy channel. I will not be associated with Hallmark.
All right, with the Factory Card Outlet or whatever then. Or I should say my cousin Gary's company. I don't know its name, but he's in that space.
But, yeah, I think Kyle underestimates life experience.
Perhaps
that's not related to data as actually leading to the same conclusion.
That might be the case, but for today, the no free lunch theorem, we've walked away with a moral. Do you walk away with a greater understanding of what I meant by hypotheses and algorithms and that sort of thing?
Only in certain contexts.
Yeah, we should unpack this more. It's a good topic, but it's a complicated one. We're going to touch on this a little bit in an upcoming interview where I speak with someone who worked on an idea called the master algorithm, and I'll ask him about how that reconciles with the no free lunch theorem.
Hey, there is one thing I forgot to mention, which is on Monday, we are releasing the feature of the week, which is a blog post that is special every Monday, but I want you guys to check it out this Monday because it's probably the first time you're going to see it for yourself.
No, a lot of people.
And then you'll come back again and again and check out future Mondays because that is an awesome part of Data Skeptic.
Yeah, so hit us up at dataskeptic.com any day of the week, but especially on Mondays.
And then I still want to give a shout out to all our subscribers and thank you for subscribing. And those who aren't subscribers, please subscribe because it's Kyle and I, and our recording instrument is broken. So please help us buy a new one.
Yeah, I'm holding the...
He holds it together with tape.
No, it's just my hand while we record.
I don't know what's better or worse, tape or Kyle's hand, but he is literally holding it. So help support us, subscribe, donate, and one time, multiple times, and that will help us get through the year and potentially buy new equipment.
Or if they're good at soldering. I'm not precise enough to fix this. I need someone better than me at soldering.
I think you should edit that out. But yes, so support us, sponsor us, and keep listening.